Welcome to the FYI on Youth Ministry, a youth ministry podcast from the Fuller Youth Institute. This season has been all about the 7 transitions of young adulthood, and today's episode is about the meaning-making transition. I am your host, Roslyn Hernández, and the young adults that we'll hear from today are Esteban, Raye, Seth, Myriam, Christian, and Raechel. But first, here is Steve with an overview of the meaning-making transition.
So we're talking about young adults and their transitions, and we want to explore this concept of the meaning-making transition. Now that may sound a little bit fuzzy or unclear, but we like this idea of meaning-making because it really begins to delve into this idea of how young adults are making sense of their worlds. And this oftentimes is where one finds their sense of spirituality. It's how I'm thinking about my spirituality and now how I'm expressing it in the different communities that I'm a part of. Now, this becomes really important because I think oftentimes the conversations around young adults and spirituality are whether or not they are in church or not. I'd like to argue that one of the challenges with that is that oftentimes we blame young adults for not showing up in the places that we expect them. Why are they not at church at 9 a.m. on a Sunday morning? They must not love God. Meaning making allows us to give a generous view of what young adults are actually doing. They actually have a deep sense of spirituality. They want their lives to matter. They want their lives to count. And they're looking for ways to express that through the communities in their lives that allow them to do that. We all are operating from some sort of narrative or system that derives meaning for how the world works. And young adults want to find that sense of consistency and resonance along the way. So we want to be open to the ways that they express that, not reducing their meaning making to where they show up or attendance, but allow the room for the conversations to come through about what's significant to them in their lives, about how they think about themselves, about their relationship with God, and about their relationship with others. I really believe that this meaning-making transition in some ways permeates all the transitions in that everything is spiritual, that there is always this sense where the things that we're going through, the transitions that young adults are experiencing, oftentimes drive them to ask deeper questions about who God is, about how God is working in their lives, about how they think about who God is and what God is calling them to.
As we've said before, and as Steve just mentioned, everything is spiritual, and young adults are in a time of deep awareness to this. Let's start with Esteban's reflection on how he became more intentional in his relationship with God and how this new way of relating to God touches other parts of his life.
So like I said, I grew up in a Christian, like my parents are pastors, so I was around God my whole life. In fact, I don't really feel like I had a relationship with God until about 3 years ago or so, when I decided to take it on me personally to seek that out. For me, it was just kind of like I already had a membership to being a Christian, so it's just there. It's like it's almost like one of those recurring payments that just happen, you just forget about. So that's how it was for me growing up. So I have to build my relationship with God. I can't rely on my dad's faith and to do things correctly or to have a great spiritual life. So I told God one day that I wanted to have a relationship with him like I would a regular person, where I could talk to him every day. And that was one of those things that just completely changed my my spiritual relationship with God, to a point where I'm now probably like, you can talk to my friends and they'll tell you that I was pretty petty back in the day, and I used to like, brag about it. And now I just like, I want to love everyone, and like I get sad hearing about people getting hurt, and war stories just makes me super sad to get to hear like the world really is messed up and people are dying, and politics and that and this and that. So it's a complete flip for me. But I really encourage just anyone, like, just to really, really dive down into what it means to be in a relationship with God. Like I took it serious. I took it like any relationship. Like you know, you nurture that relationship, you talk to that person a lot.
Young adults are holding a lot of tensions and nuance in their emotional, mental health, and faith journeys. And sometimes they need to see examples of how other people have processed these complexities. They may need to see that it's okay to ask questions and have complicated thoughts and emotions. Here's how a more mystical and contemplative space helped Raye make meaning of his internal, spiritual, and emotional experiences.
Especially in my college years, I held like a very deep mindfulness practice and contemplative practice. And really, I didn't even know that Christian contemplation was a thing until my therapist asked me one day, like, "Hey, Raye, have you heard of John of the Cross, Dark Night of the Soul?" And I'm like, "No, I haven't." I remember I picked up just the straight text and read through the whole thing. And for the first time in 3 or 4 years, I felt so understood and so known, and was just enamored by the way John of the Cross portrayed such nuanced internal realities.
Internal realities can relate to emotions and mental health, but also to religious identity. As young adults begin to experience more on their own and think more critically, they begin to process their faith, what it means to them, and who they want to be as they continue in that journey. This is what Seth shared about how he's making meaning regarding his faith.
So, I mean, I've always been a Christian, raised Christian, grew up Christian, but I think I went to seminary and learned a lot about theology and history and all these things, and it caused me to definitely like very critically reflect on my own faith and like what kind of label do I give myself? Because I grew up kind of non-denominational. I'm still kind of non-denominational, so I don't have an easy like Episcopalian or Methodist like hat I can put on. To me, it felt significant. Externally, it doesn't really. It doesn't feel like it means that much. But for me, I even had to like. I feel like I intentionally have kind of removed the adjective evangelical from myself, because when I look at that kind of tradition, I just don't fit into it anymore. I'm very much a Christian, like kind of painfully, obnoxiously a Christian. um, but that kind of subset of Christianity, which is also a journey of learning, oh, that is a tradition of Christianity that a lot of people are part of and, you know, kind of are into. And that's the tradition that raised me. I learned so many great and incredible things from that. But to sort of have that journey of rejecting that in some ways and saying, I really like this Christianity thing, but the adjective evangelical, it just doesn't fit me anymore. And so what am I losing by doing that? Am I gaining anything by doing that? And for me, that's such a small like internal shift, but it actually has felt very liberating to feel like when people are like, "Oh, well, what are you though? Like, what do you really believe?" I'm like, "I don't know. I'm a Christian. I would love to talk to you about what that means for me and explore what that looks like for you." To me, that's actually opened up a lot of doors for really great conversation with my friends from all kinds of different backgrounds. Um, but that journey of like letting go of a label and maybe accepting a new one, I mean, that's just in a religious context. I mean, there's so many more that we've already touched on. And even my friends who are part of the LGBTQ plus community, like self-identifying obviously has a lot more of a heaviness, I think, for a lot of those folks, and a lot more challenges of what you can lose by having those identities. So for me, it's like I look at these kind of small like internal shifts and they feel really weighty and important, but there's even more, you know, a vast amount of ways that these kind of labels that we play with or shift or that we understand and discover about ourselves and then invite other people into carries a lot of space for like healing, growth, but also a lot of shame and pain. And so it's really interesting. And the way that faith intersects with that, I think, is really has a lot of potential to do a lot of good and also cause harm. So being aware of that, I think, has been a part of that 20s journey for me.
Making meaning in the life of young adults is as much about internal shifts as it can be about bigger external changes like moving and acclimating. But all along, young adults need others who can walk alongside them and support them. Here are Myriam's thoughts on openness about struggles and relational support.
Everyone likes to present their lives that they have a plan and like, oh, things are going exactly right. But I think being more open with sharing how, oh, this is not what I expected and this is how it's working, or like being in a period of transition and just seeing older people in the church going through that and being more open about it will allow younger people to be like, oh, well, they're also having similar things, so that's okay. And having people that will walk alongside of you. And I think for me, something that I wish would have happened more was when I moved away to college, I feel like I lost all connections with my home church. And then I was somewhat connected with the church when I was in college, but then moved away and lost that again. And just having people more consistent through my life. Like I had some mentors in my church growing up in like high school and stuff. And I think it would have been really meaningful to me if they would have continued to reach out after I had left for college. And even just like checking in every once in a while or something, because it's obviously you can't have the same relationship once you're gone, but then you're not completely, like if you move somewhere new, not starting from scratch, you still have a Christian support and people who are cheering you on and know you and are speaking that love into your life.
Here's some advice from Christian and Raechel.
I just want to affirm what Myriam was just saying. That was so good. I feel like if I would have had, or the beauty that you can have if you have people in your life who are seeing you through all these transitions and continuing to say, and we love you, and we love you, and we love you, and we're here with you throughout all of those transitions, it does bring like a feeling of stabilization to a very disorienting and like unstable time. So I feel like we just can't speak highly enough about that. Like, just to stay in touch with the young people in your life, even if they move or go through transitions.
So I think one of the things that could be helpful for leaders who are walking with people who are going through transition of meaning making is to affirm the different things that are on your heart, that are passions or things that people are dreaming about, whether or not it's concrete or not practically in the world. But the things that God has put on your heart, I think one of the things that I've really valued recently is realizing that there's these parts of myself that come alive in different settings. I struggle with like being confident in myself and what I have to contribute in these things as a unique individual, and learning to embrace those things. I think it's really helpful for a leader to call those things out and to empower. And I also think it's really important for leaders to recognize their own personal bias or their own narrative and how it paints how they react or respond to somebody else's process. Like Raye and I and Myriam and Christian, like all of us are in places that like either we have felt calling in or we have explored and said, maybe there's something more. And I think it makes a big difference for the people in our lives to walk with us and to not disqualify the things that are in your heart, to be people that give you honest feedback and give you input if you have this established trust to receive that. But that like at the end of the day, it's the people that have stuck by you and also like let you expand beyond just what your original setting is sometimes. If you're a leader in a church, it can oftentimes feel like, oh, my limitation is only within this church setting or this space. But how do you help somebody else dream in a bigger way if it goes beyond just that?
Yeah, that's something I was thinking about too, that like whether it's within your industry, like meeting, like what Myriam was saying about meeting a nurse who's also a believer, who's like steps ahead in her career, to know that like to make those connections within the workplace of or similar fields, to be like, oh yeah, and they're a believer and they're trying to do this as a ministry as well. And also, like you were saying, Raechel, like getting a greater picture of like the entire church body. Like there's something beautiful about the individual and like walking in someone's journey with them in that, but also giving this grander idea of like, it actually doesn't all rest on you either. Like it's not up to you only to make the mission of the gospel move forward, but we're all doing it in all these areas, in business and in tech and in healthcare and in all of these things. Like we're all actually pushing together towards this mission. And there's something freeing about that as well, to like, yeah, have someone who will zone in with you on your thing and then also help you like pull back out to like 30,000 feet and see the grander picture of what God is up to in the world.
Hey, so I'm back to tell you, if you're really liking the content that you're hearing in this season, we want to hook you up with a really helpful resource. It's a guide titled 7 Things You Need to Know for Successful Young Adult Ministry. This guide covers the transitions that we're talking about in the season, but it also gives you practical questions to help you engage young adults. You can download this guide at youngadultministrynext.com. I mean, you don't have to go right now, but you could. But do come back. Like, make sure you come back after you get it, because you want to hear the next part. And now here is a wrap-up conversation with Steve. This is the wrap-up conversation for the meaning-making transition. And yeah, tell us, what came up in the research when it came to meaning-making?
Oh, meaning-making is like making sense of the world around.
Just
right?
everything.
It's philosophical, it's theological, it's
Right.
spiritual, it's religious. It's all these factors, which I think is really important, because we've said this a couple of times in some of our wrap-up conversations. Like, everything is spiritual,
Right.
Like, we found throughout the conversations that we had with young adults that they'd be like, I had a family member die, and I questioned like whether God was real, or I lost my job and I thought, well, wait a minute, I trusted God to move here, or I thought like this relationship was going to last forever, and I really believe that God put us together and it fell apart, right? Like, I think in the moments of life and experiences, we instinctively attach an ontological, an epistemological connection to that, where it really shapes the way we think about faith and God and the way the world works and everything else. And the impulse isn't just to fix it. It actually is to make sense of, like, what does this mean about the way the world works and my understanding of who God is, or what does it mean to be an image bearer? All these type of things, right? I find a lot of times that young adults won't necessarily use the same language, but if you listen closely enough, you can almost hear the spiritual tones that are there. And I think we just need to pay attention to that, because there's always a question behind the question. Like, it's not just about, like, I don't understand why the world works the way it does. There's something deeper under there. But I think, as we've talked about, young adults are, in many ways, sort of holding these realizations on their own for the first time in new and more profound ways that there's extra weight to it.
Yeah, I want to ask you in this transition conversation about something that I've been hearing about.
Yeah.
I think for several years now, this term of spiritual but not religious. And if that came up in the research, or how young people were conceptualizing this sentiment.
Yeah. So there's a lot of different ways to sort of think about it. I think for some it's true. They kind of talk about this idea of, I'm thinking about things spiritually. There isn't necessarily a religious connection. But I think what they're saying is that there's a disaffiliation with a particular denomination or church or institution, right? So there is an impulse to kind of say, I'm trying to figure this out. I'm just not expressing it in the same sort of the way. And if you remember, I mentioned at the beginning of this particular session that meaning making has the sense of the spiritual connecting to a community. There has to be the sense of expressing it through and with others as well, which I think becomes really, really important. I think what makes meaning making really interesting in some of the work that I've done with spiritual struggle is that when young adults talk about maybe the disorienting experience they have when it comes to their spirituality, is that this can be a really vulnerable space. A space that's not just intellectually vulnerable, but emotionally and relationally vulnerable as well. So for someone, a young adult, to say, I'm not sure I believe the same way that I did before, that's not just an intellectual argument. They're making a statement about their religious heritage and their relational connections that is actually quite scary for them to say it out loud. But it's part of their transition of owning their own faith, right? So we can be offended by maybe them not agreeing with like the way we brought them up or mentored them or whatever, or we can take that as a holy moment and a space where they're willing to engage us in the fact that perhaps they're thinking differently, but they're still trying to make meaning of their spirituality as they engage the world.
Yeah, and so in terms of how adults or youth leaders or young adult leaders can help young adults through these transitions of meaning making, or that through these moments that trigger meaning making moments or experiences,
Yeah.
what can we do to walk alongside them?
Oh, yeah. I love that you said walk alongside. And I think that what we've heard from the interviews and the engagement that we have is probably the best thing that we can do as adults and leaders is to learn the discipline of hanging in there with them rather than solving the problem.
Yeah.
Again, in my work with sort of thinking about spiritual struggle, a lot of times people want to solve the dissonance of young adults, not for the sake of young adults, but because we feel the dissonance, we feel their dissonance, and we just want to make it all better. And the reality is that the meaning-making transition is an invitation to step into the dissonance with young adults, not only to accompany them because they need accompaniment, but perhaps there's something for us to learn in that moment as well. And quite frankly, I think that's a really courageous space to be in. And a lot of times in ministry world, I think we're more apt to try to create programs because programs are actually quite distancing. I can do something for you and feel good.
Yeah.
It's different. It's a different posture to step into the meaning-making fray with the young adult and hang in there. And I think oftentimes the impulse with churches is if we start hearing things that are different or scary or contrary to what we've raised our children to be or whatever, is to step back. But this is the moment where I think young adults are most pleased and relieved when someone that's an adult steps toward them in these moments. And stepping toward them means not freaking out. It means asking, tell me more. It means saying, wow, I really appreciate that you're thinking about these things. What are you learning from that, right? We have to be comfortable with this in-between space in all of our lives. I think as we get older, we forget.
Yes.
I'll speak for myself. As an older adult, I've lost the familiarity of instability in my life simply because I've sort of worked through that and found my way. But if I really think about it, or if I really listen to a young adult, I will remember that it's in the liminal spaces of meaning making that perhaps sometimes that's the most beautiful vantage point to hear the voice of God, where I'm dependent upon God to get this through rather than
Depending on
the structures that I've set up for myself, right?
Yes. I'm going to move us to like the tips and advice, and I'm going to start with something that is, because I'm saying this and I'm a spiritual director, and I do see myself more in the Christian mysticism, like side of the spectrum in Christianity.
Yeah.
But there's something in this meaning-making transition, and then that, as you said, liminal spaces and spaces of mystery, where you said that like we're closer to God, like God's meeting us there. I would say to youth leaders, it's okay to be in the mystery.
Yeah.
It's okay to hold things loosely. I know that we might have, our statements that we have from our denominations, or that our church has statements, and let us see the leeway that we have within those statements, because God is so grand and vast, right? And you mentioned the Holy Spirit. Holy Spirit is not bound by our statements,
right?
Our denominations. The Holy Spirit moves in ways and teaches us different things in different ways, that because young adults are in these spaces of instability, that I think they might be more prone or more open to seeing God and the Spirit moving, even when they're having doubts, even when they're asking questions. And having those doubts and asking those questions is so courageous.
Oh, yeah.
It's like they know that God can take it. One thing we say at FYI is that questions or doubts are not the enemy of faith. It's actually silence.
Yes, absolutely.
And so making that space, so this is already the second tip, make space, make space for young adults to voice these things, to go into those processes of meaning making, because it happens a lot in reflection and conversation, to think about what we've been through, to process it, and to, if we don't process those things, is that doubt, it just keeps eating away at us. And,
absolutely.
And in the end, we get stuck in the process.
I completely agree with that. Your comment on process makes me remember some of the conversations that we've had with young adults and ministry leaders as well about sort of the distinction between process truth and arrival truth. Like, I think sometimes the impulse, especially us ministry types, is to get people to arrival truth. Like, here's where you need to be. You just need to believe this. It's the truth, historically, theologically, whatever. But the meaning-making process is a formational process where arrival truth too soon is anemic. It doesn't quite work. And so there's this element of an unfolding of our discovery of truth that is process and truth, which is spiritual direction and trusting the Spirit and all that comes with that. And I think that as we serve young adults in particular, like, if it's true that we are pursuing process truth, we need process language, right? So to talk to young adults about things like, tell me something you believe that you didn't believe a year ago. What's that been like for you? What's a question that you're still trying to figure out and you don't quite have an answer on? Kind of speaks implicitly to this idea of like, this is the process.
It normalizes it too.
It normalizes it, 100%. Do you speak to them in process-oriented ways rather than arrival-oriented ways? I think if we can remember that when young adults talk about faith, spirituality, doubt, that is a holy conversation, and let's just receive it as a gift. We don't have to change it, fix it, debate it. Like, if they've opened up to you, you've somehow given space for that, and you should congratulate yourself and receive it as a gift rather than thinking that you have to do anything with it right away. Like, enjoy the fact that you're in that moment for a little bit, because I think deep down young adults want to talk about it, and there's not a lot of spaces to do that.
Yeah, there aren't. Yeah, so it's good to create that safe space for them.
Absolutely.
That's it for today. Yeah, let us know what you think. Let's keep making meaning in the comments.
Yes, I love that. That was good.
And give us a like, subscribe, hit the notification button, and you'll get to know when the next episodes drop. So thank you so much for being with us this season, for watching this episode, and for listening.
And thank you. You're awesome.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah. Thanks, everybody.
Bye. This podcast is one of the many free resources produced by the Fuller Youth Institute. Check out the show notes for links to all of the resources mentioned in today's episode. And if you want to not just listen, but also watch this podcast, you can go find us on the Fuller Youth Institute YouTube channel. Thanks so much for listening or watching.